All right, letter 21. Here we go. My dear Wormwood, yes, a period of sexual temptation is an excellent time for working in a subordinate attack on the patient's peevishness. It may even be the main attack as long as he thinks it the subordinate one. But here, as in everything else, the way must be prepared for your moral assault by darkening his intellect. Men are not angered by mere misfortune, but by misfortune conceived as injury, and in the sense of injury depending on the feeling that a legitimate claim has been denied. The more claims on life, therefore, that your patient can be induced to make, the more often he will feel injured and, as a result, ill-tempered. Now you will have noticed that nothing throws him into a passion so easily as to find a tract of time which he reckoned to have at his own disposal unexpectedly taken from him. It is the unexpected visitor when he looked forward to a quiet evening, or the friend's talkative wife turning up when he looked forward to a tete-a-tete with the friend, and throw him out of gear. Now he is not yet so uncharitable or slothful that these small demands on his courtesy are in themselves too much for it. They anger him because he regards his time as his own and feels that it is being stolen. You must therefore zealously guard his mind, the curious assumption that my time is my own. Let him have the feeling that he starts each day as the lawful possessor of 24 hours. Let him feel as a grievous tax that portion of his property which he has to make over his employers, and as a generous donation that further portion which he allows to religious duties. But what he must never be permitted to doubt is that the total from which these deductions have been made was, in some mysterious sense, his own personal birthright. So what he's talking about is you have 24 hours in a day. Here's your time. They're your own to spend how you will, and you can get your patient annoyed by adding in certain things that he wasn't planning on having, and it makes him feel like that sense of ownership of his time has been, like his time is being wasted because something happened that he wasn't planning on. You have here a delicate task. The assumption which you want him to go on making is so absurd that if once it is questioned, we cannot find a shred of argument in its defense. The man can neither make nor retain one moment of time, and it all becomes to him a pure gift. He might as well regard the sun and moon as his chattels. He is also, in theory, committed to a total service of the enemy, and if the enemy appeared to him in bodily form and demanded that total service even for one day, he would not refuse. He would be greatly relieved if that one day involved nothing harder than listening to the conversation of a foolish woman, and he would be relieved almost to the pitch of disappointment if for 1/2 hour in that day the enemy said, "Now you may go and amuse yourself." Now, if he thinks about his assumption for a moment, even he is bound to realize that he is actually in this situation every day. When I speak of preserving this assumption in his mind, therefore, the last thing I mean you to do is to furnish him with arguments in its defense. There aren't any. Your task is purely negative. Don't let his thoughts come anywhere near it. Wrap a darkness about it, and in the center of that darkness, let his sense of ownership in time lie silent, uninspected, and operative. The sense of ownership in general is always to be encouraged. The humans are always putting up claims to ownership, which have sound equally funny in heaven and in hell, and we must keep them doing so. Much of the modern resistance to chastity comes from men's belief that they own their bodies, those vast and perilous estates pulsating with the energy that made the worlds, in which they find themselves without their consent and from which they are ejected at the pleasure of another. It is as if a royal child whom his father has placed for love's sake in titular command of some province under the real rule of wise counselors should come to fancy he really owns the cities, the forests, and the corn, in the same way he owns the bricks on the nursery floor. We produce this sense of ownership not only by pride but by confusion. We teach them not to notice the different senses of the possessive pronoun, the finely graded difference that run from my boots through my dog, my servant, my wife, my father, my master, and my country to my God. They can be taught to reduce all these senses to that of my boots, in the my of ownership. Even in the nursery, a child can be taught to mean by my teddy bear, not the old imagined recipient of affection to whom it stands for a special relation. That is what the enemy will teach them to mean if we're not careful. But the bear I can pull to pieces if I like. And at the other end of the scale, we have taught men to say, my God, in a sense not really different from my boots, meaning the God on whom I have claim for my distinguished services and whom I exploit from the pulpit, the God I have done in a corner. So what he's saying is that if we can get him to claim ownership on things, then the idea that something is mine means I can do with it whatever I want. So it's not like he uses this reference to the teddy bear in the nursery. It's not that this is my bear. It's that it is a bear that I can do with whatever I want. And so what happens then is we start to think of people that way. So this is my friend, okay? And it's not just my friend. It's a person with whom I can treat however I want to treat. And that's the idea of like objectifying other humans and treating them however we want to because they're mine. That's what he's talking about. And all the time, the joke is that the word mine in its fully possessive sense cannot be uttered by a human being about anything. In the long run, either our Father or the enemy will say mine of such things that exists, and especially of each man. They will find out in the end, never fear, to whom their time, their souls, and their bodies really belong. Certainly not to them. Whatever happens at present, the enemy says mine of everything on the pedantic, legalistic ground that he made it. Our Father hopes in the end to say mine of all things on the more realistic, dynamic ground of conquest. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape.